Have you ever finished watching a movie in English, understood most of the story, and then told yourself, "My English is terrible"? Or maybe you listened to a podcast, understood many words, followed the conversation, and still felt like you were not making progress. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. In fact, many English learners have exactly the same experience. They focus on the words they didn't understand, the sentences they missed, the expressions they had never heard before. And because of that, they completely ignore everything they actually understood. It's a strange habit. Imagine listening to a 10-minute conversation. You understand the topic, you understand the situation, you understand most of the ideas, but there are a few words you don't know. What happens? Most people don't think, "Wow, I understood almost everything." Instead, they think, "I missed those words. My English is not good enough." And little by little, this creates a false picture in their minds. They start believing they are stuck. They start believing they are not improving. But the reality is often very different. The truth is that understanding a language is not all or nothing. It's not a test where you need 100% to succeed. Real communication doesn't work that way. Even native speakers don't understand every word they hear. Sometimes people speak too fast. Sometimes they use unfamiliar expressions. Sometimes they miss details, and that's completely normal. Learning English is not about understanding everything. It's about understanding enough to follow a story, enough to enjoy a conversation, enough to connect with another person. And if you can already do that, even a little, then your English is probably much better than you think. Today we want to explore this idea together, because many learners are much closer to fluency than they realize. They just don't see it yet.
That's such an important point, Jordan. I think many English learners don't realize how much understanding happens automatically. Sometimes people tell me, "Laura, I can understand some English, but I don't think I'm really learning." And when I ask them a few questions, I discover something interesting. They can follow a YouTube video. They can understand the topic of a podcast. They can recognize common expressions. And they can often predict what a speaker is going to say next. Those are not small things. Those are signs of real understanding. For example, imagine you're watching a movie in English. Maybe you don't understand every single word, but you understand who the characters are. You understand the conflict. You understand the emotions. You understand what is happening. That means your brain is already processing English. And that's a huge step. Another sign is when certain words feel familiar. You hear them and immediately understand them. You don't stop. You don't translate. You simply know what they mean. Maybe it's a phrase like, "How are you doing?" Or, "That makes sense." Or, "I'll see you tomorrow." You hear it, and your brain responds naturally. Many learners don't celebrate these moments because they seem small. But those moments are actually proof that English is becoming part of your everyday thinking. And here's another interesting sign. Have you ever listened to someone speaking English and thought, "I understand the idea, but I can't explain exactly how I understood it"? That's a good sign too. Because language isn't only about vocabulary, it's also about patterns. Your brain starts recognizing patterns long before you become fluent. And often, that's when real progress begins. So if you've been feeling discouraged lately, take a moment and think about all the things you can already understand today that felt impossible a year ago. You might discover that you've made much more progress than you realized.
Laura, I think that's exactly where many learners get stuck. They don't have a language problem. They have a perception problem, because the human brain has a very interesting habit. It pays much more attention to mistakes than to progress. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you listen to a 10-minute podcast in English. You understand 80% of it. You follow the story. You understand the main ideas. You learn something new. But there are a few moments where you get lost. Maybe you don't know a word. Maybe someone speaks too fast. Maybe you miss an expression. What do most learners remember afterward? Not the 80%. They remember the 20%. And suddenly, their conclusion becomes, "I didn't understand enough." That's fascinating when you think about it. Because if the same thing happened in another area of life, we would see it differently. Imagine going to the gym. You lift more weight than last month. You have more energy. You feel stronger, but instead of noticing that progress, you focus only on the one exercise you couldn't complete. It wouldn't make much sense. Yet that's exactly what many people do with English. They measure themselves by what they miss, not by what they understand. And over time, that becomes emotionally exhausting. Some learners spend years improving while feeling like they are not improving at all. Not because they are failing, but because they are looking in the wrong direction. They're constantly asking, what don't I know yet? Instead of asking, what can I do today that I couldn't do 6 months ago? And sometimes the answer is surprising. Maybe 6 months ago, you couldn't watch a video in English. Today you can. Maybe 6 months ago, you translated every sentence. Today you don't. Maybe 6 months ago, you were afraid to listen to native speakers. Today you understand much more than you expected. Those things matter. Those things count. And I think many learners underestimate how powerful small improvements really are.
I really like what you said, Jordan, because I think many learners are waiting for confidence to arrive one day. Almost like a reward. They tell themselves, when my English is better, I'll feel confident. When my pronunciation is perfect, I'll feel confident. When I know more vocabulary, I'll finally relax. But that's not usually how it works. In many cases, confidence comes first, and fluency comes later. Think about children learning their first language. They make mistakes all the time. They use the wrong words. They pronounce things incorrectly. Sometimes they create sentences that don't even make sense, but they keep speaking. Why? Because they are not waiting to become perfect before they communicate. And as adults, we often do the opposite. We wait, we prepare, we study, we practice silently, and we keep telling ourselves, I'm not ready yet. The problem is that ready can become a moving target. No matter how much progress you make, your brain keeps finding another reason to wait. Another grammar rule, another vocabulary list, another course, another excuse. And that's why confidence is so important. Confidence is not believing that your English is perfect. Confidence is believing that you can communicate even when your English isn't perfect. That's a completely different mindset. And once you start thinking that way, something interesting happens. You stop seeing mistakes as evidence of failure. You start seeing them as part of the learning process. You become more willing to speak, more willing to listen, more willing to participate. And every one of those experiences helps you improve faster. So if you've been waiting for confidence to magically appear someday, maybe it's time to try a different approach. Maybe confidence isn't the result of speaking English. Maybe confidence is what allows you to start speaking English in the first place.
Laura, I think this is where things become very practical, because everything we've discussed so far leads to one important question. How can someone actually see their progress? How can they prove to themselves that they understand more English than they think? And honestly, I believe the answer is much simpler than most people expect. Most learners spend a lot of time measuring what they don't know, but very few people measure what they do know. Imagine this. Tonight, after this video, you watch a short YouTube video in English. Maybe it's 5 minutes long, maybe it's 10. Don't worry about understanding everything. Don't pause every sentence. Don't open a dictionary. Just listen. When the video finishes, take a piece of paper and write down everything you understood. Not the words you missed, the things you understood. Maybe you understood the topic. Maybe you understood the story. Maybe you understood a joke. Maybe you understood the speaker's opinion. Write it all down. Then ask yourself a simple question. Could I have done this 1 year ago? For many learners, the answer is no. And that's when something interesting happens. They suddenly realize that they have been improving all along. They just weren't paying attention to the evidence. Another exercise I love is revisiting old material. Go back to a video, podcast, or lesson that felt difficult 6 months ago. Listen to it again. Very often, you'll discover that it feels much easier now. The words seem clearer. The sentences feel more familiar. The ideas make more sense. And that's one of the most satisfying moments in language learning, because it allows you to see progress that was invisible before. I think one of the biggest mistakes learners make is assuming that progress should feel dramatic. But most progress isn't dramatic. It's quiet, it's gradual, it's almost invisible while it's happening. Day after day, your brain is building connections, recognizing patterns, learning sounds, learning expressions, learning rhythm. And then one day you suddenly notice that something which once felt impossible now feels normal. That's why I always tell people this. Don't judge your English based on a single conversation. Don't judge your English based on one difficult podcast. And don't judge your English based on one bad day. Look at the bigger picture, because when you do, you may discover that you've come much farther than you thought.
Jordan, I think that's such an important message because sometimes learners become so focused on the destination that they forget to notice how far they've already traveled. And I understand why that happens. Learning a language can feel strange. Unlike other goals, progress is not always easy to see. If you go to the gym, you can see changes in the mirror. If you save money, you can see the number growing in your account. But language learning is different. A lot of the progress happens quietly, inside your mind, without you even noticing it. One day you suddenly understand a sentence that used to confuse you. One day you recognize a word you've heard many times before. One day you watch a video and realize you didn't need subtitles as often. These moments seem small, but they are not small. They are evidence. Evidence that your brain is learning. Evidence that you are improving. Evidence that all those hours of listening, reading, studying, and practicing are creating results. And I think many learners need to hear this. You do not need to understand everything to be successful. You do not need perfect pronunciation. You do not need perfect grammar. And you do not need to sound like a native speaker. What you need is consistency. What you need is patience. And most importantly, what you need is the ability to recognize your own progress. Because if you only focus on what is missing, you will always feel behind. There will always be another word to learn, another expression, another grammar rule, another challenge waiting for you. The finish line keeps moving. But if you take a moment to appreciate what you can already do, something changes. Learning becomes more enjoyable. You feel more motivated. You become more confident. And confidence creates momentum. I also want to say something to the person listening right now. Maybe you've been studying English for months, maybe for years. Maybe you felt frustrated recently. Maybe you've even wondered if all your effort is worth it. If that's you, I want you to remember something. The fact that you are listening to this conversation right now is already proof of progress. You are understanding these ideas. You are following this discussion. You are connecting with what we are saying. And that means your English is working. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not exactly where you want it to be, but it is working. And that's something to be proud of. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, my English isn't good enough, try replacing that thought with a different one. My English is improving every day. Because improvement is what matters, not perfection. And the truth is simple. You probably understand much more English than you think. You just need to give yourself credit for it.
Laura, before we finish, I think there is one more thing that many learners need to hear. Sometimes progress in English doesn't look the way people expect. Many learners are waiting for a big moment, a moment where they suddenly become fluent, a moment where everything feels easy, a moment where they finally say, now my English is good. But real progress is usually much quieter than that. In fact, some of the most important signs of improvement are easy to miss. For example, have you ever watched a video in English and realized you forgot to turn on subtitles? That's progress. Have you ever heard a song and suddenly understood a sentence without looking up the lyrics? That's progress. Have you ever watched a movie and understood a joke immediately? That's progress too. Sometimes people think that progress only counts when they learn new grammar or memorize new vocabulary. But language is much bigger than that. Language is understanding. Language is connection. Language is feeling comfortable with ideas that once felt unfamiliar. Another sign of progress is when English starts appearing naturally in your daily life. Maybe you read a comment online and understand it instantly. Maybe you hear a phrase and don't need to translate it. Maybe you start thinking simple thoughts in English without even trying. Those moments may seem small, but they're actually very important, because they show that English is slowly becoming part of your world. And I think that's what many learners forget. Learning a language isn't only about studying. It's about becoming familiar with it. It's about reaching a point where English no longer feels like a stranger. It starts feeling normal, comfortable, natural, and that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens through hundreds of small moments that often go unnoticed. So if you're listening today, I want you to pay attention to those moments. Celebrate them, recognize them, because they are evidence that you're moving forward, even on the days when it doesn't feel that way. And sometimes, the progress you don't notice is the progress that matters most.
Jordan, as I was listening to you, I kept thinking about something that happens to so many English learners. Sometimes they spend years chasing fluency, years chasing confidence, years chasing the feeling that one day they will finally be good enough And without realizing it, they keep moving the goalposts. When they learn basic English, they want intermediate English. When they reach an intermediate level, they want advanced English. When they become advanced, they compare themselves to native speakers. And because the target is always moving, they never allow themselves to feel successful. They never stop and say, "Look how far I've come." I think that's one of the biggest challenges in language learning. Not the grammar, not the vocabulary, not even pronunciation. The challenge is learning how to recognize your own progress, because progress often feels invisible while it's happening. Think about a child growing taller. If you see that child every day, you barely notice the change. But if you look at a photo from 2 years ago, the difference is obvious. Language learning is very similar. You don't always notice what is changing from one day to the next. But when you compare yourself to who you were 6 months ago or a year ago, the difference can be incredible. Maybe there was a time when English sounded like noise. Today you understand conversations. Maybe there was a time when reading an article felt impossible. Today you can understand the main ideas. Maybe there was a time when hearing native speakers felt overwhelming. Today you can follow along much more comfortably. Those things matter. Those things are real. And those things deserve recognition. I also think it's important to remember that language learning is not a race. There is no perfect timeline. There is no age limit. There is no deadline that says you must reach fluency by a certain date. Every learner moves at a different pace. Some people learn quickly, others learn slowly. Some have more free time, others have busy jobs and families. But none of that changes the most important fact. Every step forward counts. Every new word counts. Every conversation counts. Every podcast counts. Every moment you choose to listen instead of giving up counts. And if you're listening to us right now, I want you to take a moment and acknowledge something. You are doing something today that millions of people wish they could do. You are listening to a conversation in English. You are following ideas. You are understanding meaning. You are building a skill that can open doors, create opportunities, and connect you with people from all over the world. That is not a small achievement. That is something to be proud of. So the next time your inner voice says, "My English isn't good enough," try answering with a different thought. My English is better than it was before. Because that's the truth that really matters. Not perfection, not comparison, progress. And progress is already happening, even on the days when you don't feel it. Even on the days when you make mistakes. Even on the days when learning feels difficult. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep trusting the process. And most importantly, keep believing in the evidence that is already in front of you. Because the fact that you understood this conversation today is proof of something very important. Your English is working. It is growing. And you understand much more English than you think. Thank you so much for spending this time with Jordan and me today. We truly hope this conversation helped you see your progress a little more clearly. Take care, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next episode of Speak English Naturally.